Judy, this year the theme for the AI gathering, the AI Jam, that's taking place at the Cooperrider Center in Burlington, Vermont this year, is focusing on the theme appreciative voice and choice. And as I contemplate that theme, what comes to mind for me is a very early innovation that you shepherded. And I would love to have you speak to how that innovation in appreciative inquiry emerged for you and what it has meant for furthering the notion of appreciative voice and choice in the world.
So I think you're talking about Images and Voices of Hope, which was, it was interesting because sometimes you arrive at something without really thinking through the impact. I mean, it seems like the right next idea. So in 1999, in June, I'd been working in media for a long time, 15, 20 years. And what was bothering me was that I didn't feel that the media was thinking about the impact of what they were doing. I felt like it was America's biggest export. You know, soap operas, news programs, films, etc., TV shows. And I didn't feel like anybody was asking, what's the impact of that? They were counting everything else: box office receipts, magazine subscriptions, Nielsen ratings, etc., but they weren't looking at impact. So I proposed with others that we bring together media people in Manhattan to look at that. And I talked with David about it, and he had a graduate student named Daniela Zandi from Holland who thought this might be what she'd want to do her dissertation on. So we all mobilized, and I talked with the Brahma Kumaris about it, which is a spiritual meditation organization based in India, and then another foundation that was civil sector. And together we convened about 200 people in media. I think it was like 182 people in all kinds of media. So it was the president of Warner Books, it was radio people from Sausalito, it was the artist Peter Max, it was journalists from CBS. I mean, it was a really big eclectic room. And the question was, what is the impact of public image making and public storytelling on society? So it was a fairly neutral question. It wasn't a classic appreciative inquiry question. And so we had several, that was the theme, and then we had a protocol underneath that. And the room was just alive, right? 180 people, just buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. And then afterwards, as we're listening, it really got quite electric because there were people who said, well, that's ridiculous. It's not our problem. Who cares what the impact is? You know, news people, we just got to tell the truth, right? It's not our problem. Others were saying, what? You got to be kidding. It is your problem. So it was very, very electric. And long story short, we planned it to be a one-off. We really intended to pack up and go home. It was going to be a one-time thing. It was interesting. It was really fun to get those people together, really interesting. We learned a lot, but we didn't plan to do it again. And then the calls began to come in. We'd hit a nerve with this question about the impact of media. And so it became a movement. And it operated independently for until 2008. And then we organized it into a 501c3 with an independent board. Same question: what's the impact of public image making and public storytelling on society? And then it took a turn. And this is interesting from an appreciative inquiry standpoint. In 2012, there was a big tragedy that happened in Newtown, Connecticut. And 27-year-olds were killed by a mentally ill young man. And the editor of the town paper was a man named Curtis Clark. And he was struggling to figure out what was the role of the community paper because here was the New York Times and CNN and CBS and all these trucks, news trucks were in town, and they're putting microphones in front of these grieving parents, and they're shooting all this dreadful footage. And Clark is a very thoughtful guy, and he said he came to the conclusion that the role of the community paper was to tell a redemptive narrative, so the town would not always be stuck in that moment. I heard that, took it to our board, and said, what do you think? And one of our board members said, let's call it restorative narrative. So the idea was then, how do you bring the most appreciative lens to the process that people go through such that they begin to become whole again? Not to say that a grieving parent ever recovers from the loss of a child, but we now know from the research in positive psychology that as they become stronger, the tendency towards resilience is strong in the human being, and that when they're asked the right questions and they're moved in the right direction, they come back to be contributors. They're no longer just devastated and unable to generate ideas or have energy around supporting the community, but they come back. They come back with a certain strength and what would you say, resilience, a drive for wholeness, a drive to help one another. And so we're now running, we created 2 colloquiums, we've run 3 summits, and we've got a 3-year program, a fellows program that's been running for 3 years to look at restorative narrative and what it means in the world of media. We're also starting a movement in what we're calling strength-based media, and you'll understand the framework for strengths-based media. So the idea is that for media, especially news, I mean, not so much, film and public art and all of that, they are more familiar with both sides of the coin. But news, because of the definition of what is newsworthy, tends to live in the deficit sector. And you go from one catastrophe to another catastrophe, leaving your audiences feeling in despair. So the idea is, can we affect the news model such that we tell the difficult stuff, people need to hear it, but that we then locate the story in the process of the movement back to wholeness, back to grace, back to compassion, empathy, love, forgiveness, etc., etc. And as we know from positive emotion research, once people move into that spectrum of positive emotional strength, they have more capacity. They have more that they can give. So all of this came from the seed of appreciative inquiry on that day in June in 1999.
That's wonderful. So it's really, what I hear from you is the power of the positive question to bring forth an appreciative voice and move people in that direction.
Yes, and I would even back it up further. I would say it's the power of the positive vision before you even open your mouth. So in other words, you have to be in the awareness of human well-being to start with. That awareness of well-being or goodness as our natural nature creates an attitude that's going to, that orients to the world a certain way. The attitude orients us to see what's possible. That positive attitude generates a vision, a certain quality of vision. So I look at you and I see that you're not damaged or broken. You're just someone whose resilience and whose wholeness and whose capacity to live fully has been somehow submerged or covered up. So I look at you with that vision, and out of that vision comes that question that then rehabilitates you and reminds you of what's already inside of you. So I would say that it starts upstream of the question in the awareness, which is why I think for appreciative inquiry to have lasting impact, I think it has to be coupled with a reflective practice of some kind. And I think it can be whatever. I don't think it needs to be any certain practice, but I think the individual has to have the the ability inside to understand, to kind of elevate the quality of their awareness, attitude, and vision, so that they can be a source for that quality of question and engagement.
So are you saying that there's that the source is some kind of interior appreciative voice that needs to be unleashed?
I'm saying that I believe that the natural nature of human beings is strengths-based or virtue-based or a positive emotional base. I mean, you can use whatever framework makes most sense to you, but that's our natural nature. And that that when we locate ourselves in that place, using whatever reflective method we have, it can be that you walk and journal and all of that. It can be that you have a certain meditative practice, or somehow you have a contemplative part of your life that encourages you to continue to return to that, because we all get pulled off. These are hard times. So we all get pulled into critical places and negative places and discouraged places. But from a discouraged place, from a place of frustration, we're not as likely to work in an appreciative framework because we're not in the right awareness. When we move ourselves to the right awareness, hence attitude, hence vision, then the questions that come out of that are appreciative. They invoke what's strongest in us. That's what I believe.
Great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.